From the Telesur English headquarters in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Soini Gray, and this is from the South. We begin in Peru, where Kenji Fujimori, the youngest son of former President Alberto Fujimori, says he's been expelled from the main opposition party, Fuerza Popular, after having a disagreement with his sister Keiko. Kenji tweeted that the bloc had decided unanimously to expel him. The right-wing party began a disciplinary case against Kenji in December after he helped to block a move to impeach President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. Many in Peru believe Kenji had done a deal with the president to secure his father's pardon. Human rights activists and social movements have marched again in Lima against the pardon. Alberto Fujimori had been serving a 25-year sentence for corruption and human rights crimes during his government in the 1990s. The protesters say his release denies justice to the victims and are calling for President Kuczynski to resign.
This is the fifth citizens' protest. We continue insisting and we will remain on the streets until this illegal, fraudulent pardon negotiated among killers and the corrupt falls apart. We are going to achieve it and we want it overturned. We want President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski to resign and all corrupt leaders to leave.
We'll solve the problem of dreamers in exchange for a Great Wall on the border with Mexico. That seems to be U.S. President Donald Trump's main message on immigration in his State of the Union address on Tuesday night. He called for unity between Republicans and Democrats to serve the American people, and he accused Central American gangs of bringing violence into the country, even though MS-13 and other similar groups were founded in California. Trump called for a clampdown on chain migration. That's when legal U.S. residents sponsor family members for immigration to the U.S.
In recent weeks, 2 terrorist attacks in New York were made possible by the visa lottery and chain migration. In the age of terrorism, these programs present risks we can just no longer afford. It's time to reform these outdated immigration rules and finally bring our immigration system into the 21st century.
Immigrants from Latin America and elsewhere watched the speech anxiously for any new indication of President Trump's policy on immigration. Some said they felt the government isn't willing to help them.
I do have that little fear on me of those agents coming to my house, to my home, be like, "Oh, we're here for you. You're gonna go back to your country."
We're watching this speech to the nation from President Trump, from whom we have got threats from his government. We didn't see any solution as always, so our reaction is getting ready for the next election. We need to change this government that doesn't represent the immigrant community and doesn't represent the working class of this country.
The U.S. isn't the only country grappling with an influx of immigrants. Chile is dealing with hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants in search of new opportunities, and social organizations have been mobilized to ensure they're not being discriminated against.
Around 2,000 migrants living in Chile have no papers. Some were part of this demonstration, where they delivered 300 letters to President Michelle Bachelet, requesting a new process to sort out people's immigration status.
People who don't have economic resources cannot afford to pay to sort out their papers, which is sometimes very expensive. This is an institutional vicious circle which only generates discrimination and pushes people into irregular migratory status.
Social organizations have demanded an amnesty for migrants since 2015 to solve the institutional failure that does not guarantee people a legal documentation process, especially since the immigration bill submitted by the government was rejected by Congress.
The president had the opportunity to change this, but she's not efficient enough. Here are some people, a small percent of all of us who need to regularize documents because we are not illegal persons. We are people who are looking for a better life, better jobs in order to help our families.
The CLAC economic report shows that Chile is the Latin American country where immigration has increased most in the last 5 years.
Los niveles de precarización que existen en nuestro país, una realidad que viven todos quienes...
We also assume the commitment to defend immigrant rights. They are part of all of us who live here, in a country which should guarantee social rights for everyone.
De todos quienes vivimos acá a vivir en el fondo en un país que tenga derechos sociales garantizados.
Immigration is often treated as a law and order issue. Migrant communities are portrayed as linked to crime, and their human rights and protections are frequently neglected.
Our laws were made 50 years ago. They are out-of-date laws. They see immigration as a national security issue, as if it were a problem of war, as if there is an invasion going on. It is impossible for workers who were born outside our territory to be integrated into this country and give all the potential and wealth they bring.
This immigration process will now be handed over to the incoming conservative government, which is why these immigrant organizations will continue to demonstrate.
There is hope yet for a resolution between Venezuela's government and the opposition. Both sides are meeting on this third day of the latest round of dialogue. Jorge Rodriguez, head of the government delegation, says both parties have agreed on almost everything on the agenda.
We have agreed on a lot of what we discussed. We have moved forward with great speed, so much so that there are only 2 items on the agenda left to discuss. We have agreed on most of those 6 main items in the agenda. We just have to agree on 2 things regarding one of those items. I'm 98% sure we will reach for an agreement.
The United Nations says the good offices process between Guyana and Venezuela has broken down, and it's sending the border dispute between the 2 countries to the International Court of Justice for a peaceful resolution. On Tuesday, the UN Secretary General released a statement where he said significant enough progress has not been made on the issue, and the ICJ should be used to find a solution. But he also suggested that the continued good offices process may still be of use to both countries. We're taking a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting on.
Calling on Congress to finally close the deadly loopholes that have allowed MS-13 and other criminal gangs to break into our country. We have proposed new legislation that will fix our immigration laws.
Welcome back. Ecuador heads to the polls this Sunday for the referendum. With just days to go, political parties and movements have intensified their campaign efforts. 13 million voters have to decide on 7 questions proposed by President Lenin Moreno, 5 of them that could modify the Constitution. Political stakeholders have to end their campaigns on Thursday. From midnight Friday local time, political parties and movements will not be allowed any more electoral propaganda. And campaigning is intense outside of Ecuador's borders as well. There are thousands of Ecuadorians living in Venezuela, and they're being encouraged to cast their ballots.
Ecuadorians are being called on to vote from Venezuela on the 4th of February in Caracas. The Don Bosco School will be the main polling place where 14,000 registered Ecuadorians in the city will vote. There will be 27 polling stations open from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Social media has been our main tool to inform the community. Here in the consulate, we have received over 120 citizens a day, where we inform them directly. We also have visited the communities.
Valencia and Mérida are the other 2 cities with polling stations for this referendum. Voters must have their ID or their passport. In Venezuela, the campaign has started. The Ecuadorian Assemblyman for Latin America, Caribbean and Africa, Mauricio Zambrano, has come all the way to Caracas to meet with the Ecuadorian community in Venezuela's capital.
Even though these are questions that affect the Ecuadorian society, there are questions that need to be explained because they are a step back in our rights, and they shouldn't be approved in this referendum.
This referendum is deceptive, untruthful, and devious. We had worked for our country to keep going as it did with former President Correa, and we didn't expect this deception, and it hurts, not only to me, but to the Ecuadorian people and everybody that is here. I've been living here for 40 years, and we don't want to go back to the past.
This is a questionnaire that more than 13 million Ecuadorians will have to answer this Sunday. Questions 2 and 3 are the most controversial. The second talks about the indefinite re-election, and the third one talks about the restructuring of the Citizens Participation Council.
If the yes option wins in this question, it is true that the current members of the Citizens Participation Council will finish their term. But we cannot say that the new members will be in favor of one person or another.
40 political organizations that are authorized by Ecuador's National Electoral Council will remain on the streets until Thursday to try to convince Ecuadorian citizens to vote yes or no.
Here's a fun fact about Ecuador's elections. Ecuador was the first country in Latin America to allow women to vote. That breakthrough happened in 1929. One practice that has remained is that men and women have to use separate voting booths. Ecuador tried to change that rule last year, but various women's movements in Ecuador and abroad opposed the measure. They say the practice is a reminder that Ecuador broke ground by giving women rights ahead of its peers in the region, and only the Dominican Republic has a similar voting process. And still with the election, President Lenin Moreno made the headlines for all the wrong reasons last year. According to the New York Times, he was one of many public figures accused of buying Twitter followers. The newspaper said Moreno was a client of Divumi, a company that offers fake Twitter followers. The president allegedly used this service in 2017 when he was a presidential candidate in a bid to boost his campaign. Moreno has not responded to the allegations. Costa Rica still holds its presidential election on Sunday. Wednesday marked the end of campaigning for the contenders, but it could be down to the wire because polls indicate the largest number of voters are the undecided.
The Supreme Electoral Tribunal is ready for the elections next Sunday. They are sure that they will have the results that night.
The responsible board and the members of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal will communicate the results on Sunday night.
The tribunal asked the political parties and the media to run a clean campaign.
We talked to them about the quality of the platform and the responsibility of the candidates of each party, so the voters can choose the best men and women who will rule the country. Let's look for and encourage respect for these final days.
Social Christian Unity's candidate asked not to divide the country.
We will defend same-sex marriages as bravely as we defend the ones between women and men. We will establish civil union rights for them. Those who want to fight and divide the country will find a social Christian wall to stop them. We won't allow them to divide this country.
Liberación Nacional keeps its speech about 150,000 working places and tries to get more support to pass to the second round.
We must create jobs for 150,000 people. Costa Rica needs work. People need work. If we do, 150,000 families will have an income, and that means more people will go to supermarkets and restaurants.
The ruling party, Acción Ciudadana, wants to promote change and trust in the citizens. They promise more dialogue and participation.
A lot is at stake, but what will this election decide? Well, citizen dialogue are the people who will win these elections.
None of these and other 9 candidates seem to be able to win this first round on February 5th. 2 of them will have to keep working in order to charm the voters on April 1st. This will be the 3rd time in history in which the presidency will be elected in a second round vote.
Over in Brazil, former President Lula da Silva continues to fight to secure a place in the upcoming election. Our correspondent Andre Vieira reports.
Here in Brazil, justice has denied the request of the defense team of Lula da Silva for an habeas corpus to prevent him from facing detention. That's after Lula was sentenced to more than 12 years in prison in the second stage of the trial. The defense brought this request to the Supreme Court because it believes there has been multiple human rights violations during Lula's trial. Lula's lawyers highlight several technical irregularities in this process. For example, the fact that the judges had their votes ready ahead of the trial. They add that the judge, Sergio Moro, who condemned Lula in the first stage of the trial, has no right to do so because the crimes he has been accused of fall outside the judge's territorial jurisdiction. In the coming days, the defense will deliver new statements and evidence to demand the annulment of Lula's conviction and protect his right to run in the presidential elections. We have also learned that the defense will present their case to the United Nations to denounce what they call a human rights violation, because there is no evidence in the accusation that Lula had received an apartment as a form of bribe. Lula's lawyers say he was convicted based on alleged intention to commit a crime, but there has been no proof, so they will challenge the Brazilian state and the Brazilian justice system. They say this is a case of political persecution because Lula trumped the other candidates in presidential polls. In the latest poll, Lula continues to lead the race. Even after this conviction, he leads all possible scenarios with 37% of the vote in his favor.
We thank Andre Vieira for that report. Mexico's oil giant Pemex is set to auction 29 areas in the Gulf of Mexico to foreign oil firms on Wednesday, the largest block yet on the table. The move is part of a larger restructuring effort to bring in foreign investment, but there are fears the company will struggle finding international oil partners due to high fees, low oil prices, and uncertainty ahead of a presidential election in July. Energy officials in Mexico are trying to calm nerves, explaining Mexico is in fact seeing international interest.
So we see more participation from Japanese companies. The Chinese have returned. We have seen a state company from India. We have seen the Australians again. This should not surprise us because the greatest importers of hydrocarbons are in Asia.
In Chile, police have used water cannons to suppress hundreds of protesters in Santiago who were demonstrating over the mining of lithium. Police detained a number of protesters who say the material is a strategic natural resource which should be nationalized. Earlier this week, Chile said it may be open to allowing more lithium to be mined to meet demand from U.S. electric car maker Tesla. Every day, more communities from the Peruvian Amazon are being affected by extractive industries. According to official numbers, 78% of the Nurara population in Santa Rosa de Sahali are opposed to mercury contamination. The government has yet to take any measures to combat this issue.
Not long ago, a report by the Health Ministry was leaked. It spoke of a town that was almost entirely contaminated by mercury. There is evidence dating back to 2014. Nevertheless, to this day, nothing has been done to fix this crisis. The source of the contamination hasn't been found, something that could be done by a simple hair analysis.
The lack of action allows Plus Petrol, the main suspect, to not take responsibility for such acute and massive contamination, which likely stems from gold mining. If they weren't guilty, children wouldn't present such high levels of mercury contamination, which is present in 78% of the population.
The Interethnic Association of the Peruvian Amazon has lodged complaints to the Health and Environment Ministry. They have also alerted 6 UN rapporteurs about the crisis in Nahua and other nearby communities.
Mercury is affecting the Amazon in general and indigenous communities specifically, but it's more severely affecting first contact and isolated populations since their survival mainly depends on the well-being of the environment.
Beyond mercury spills, indigenous communities are constantly exposed to health crises. Diarrhea, hepatitis B, TB are some of the diseases affecting these communities, and they have never been treated by the Peruvian government.
Health is a main issue since it's directly related to people's survival. If we do nothing to help them, to give them medical attention, and if we continue these high-impact activities such as mining, then how are we serving these people?
During his last visit to the Amazon, Pope Francis urged Latin American governments to establish public policies that include indigenous communities. For Peru, there isn't even a health system that includes them.
We take another short break. Join us after a look at what our multimedia team is reporting. Welcome back. Now let's have a look at some other stories from around the world.
British Prime Minister Theresa May has begun a 3-day visit to China as she tries to strengthen her country's global trade links before its contentious divorce from the European Union in March 2019. May will discuss other issues including climate change and North Korea, while she is also under pressure to address the political situation in former colony Hong Kong. The chief of the Delhi Commission for Women in India has called for the death penalty for the rapist of an 8-month-old baby girl, which shocked the country. The baby is being treated in hospital for severe injuries. It's the latest case in India notorious for sexual violence against women and children. According to the National Crime Records Bureau, nearly 11,000 cases of child rape were reported in India in 2015. It's believed 3 children are raped every day in Delhi alone.
We are the rape capital of the world. It is such an embarrassment, an 8-month-old baby being raped. Her cries are there in the entire ICU. I feel that she has not been raped. I feel I have been raped. I, for one, very strongly believe that death penalty is what will bring about some kind of a mindset change. There will be fear, but it has to be done in each and every case and not just as a show measure in one odd case.
Meanwhile, 30 South Korean skiers have departed for joint training in North Korea. The conciliatory gesture was made between the two countries ahead of the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. Both sides agreed to march together under a unification flag during the opening ceremony on the 9th of February. The two countries are also fielding a unified team in women's ice hockey. North Korea is planning to show off dozens of long-range missiles at a parade to mark the anniversary of the founding of the Korean People's Army on 8th of February, just a day before the Winter Olympics is set to begin in South Korea. North Korea announced last week that 8th February will be the new date to mark the anniversary, which was previously held on 25th of April.
And we finish our broadcast with the images of the lunar eclipse that has brought three rare phenomena together on the same day for the first time in more than 150 years. The three events are the blue moon, that is the second full moon this month, a supermoon when the moon is unusually close to the earth, and a blood moon, which occurs when the moon appears red during an eclipse. This lunar trifecta, as NASA calls it, last took place in the Western Hemisphere on March 31st, 1866. The next total lunar eclipse will take place on July 27th of this year. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.